about my view of the threats that Germany might be confronted with in the coming years. And if I take a look at the situation, especially the presentation by Ambassador Edmund Fitton-Brown, I found lots of evidence that the jihadist scene worldwide is extremely fragmented. And one of the big questions that I pose myself, and of course all you guys, if you want to answer it, is when does it end? And if I look at the different organizations, the different theaters of conflict out there, I tend to identify two organizations as especially interesting because they show what has changed in the jihadist scene in recent years. One of them is ISIS-K, or ISIL-K as it has been called here, and JNIM. And I think that in Mali and its neighboring states. And I think what is so striking about these two organizations is that both might have the potential to get into a leading position in the jihadist scene in the coming years, and both of them are not led by Arabs. And that would be something totally new, because the leading organizations, al-Qaeda first, ISIS later, were always and still are dominated by Arab leaders. It shows us something about the nature of the scene. It is more transnational today, it is more global and more international. And everything that we say about future threats, either to Europe or to Germany or to any other state, I think is somewhat hypothetical for the time being. Nevertheless, I will try to speak on 3 points. First, Afghanistan, secondly, Syria and Iraq, and thirdly, Germany, always with regard to the overarching question, what is important for the threat here in Germany. In Afghanistan, the defeat of the government and coalition forces has totally changed the equation. And I first asked myself whether ISIS-K would be up to countermeasures by the Taliban. It has showed us all that it is, and that it is there to stay. Furthermore, it is influencing the Taliban to stick to a harder line so that they don't lose fighters to ISIS-K, and thereby ISIS-K is hindering a stabilization of the country. And perhaps most importantly, ISIS-K probably doesn't have an external operations capability for the time being, but it has international ambitions with which I think focus on Central Asian migrants in Europe. More on this point a little bit later in my part about Germany. Secondly, Syria and Iraq. So, no, first, Afghanistan, I think, is so important for us because there is this extremely attractive organization, and I think it is only due to the problems of reaching Pakistan or reaching Afghanistan, for that matter, that keeps international recruits from the Western world, but also from the Middle East, from joining this organization. I think the organization has the biggest capabilities to become the leading jihadist organization in the coming years. Secondly, Syria and Iraq. There it is not one attractive organization, but it's rather the volatile situation and the sheer number of Europeans and Germans still out there, either in not well-protected jails or as members of organizations. Again, in Syria and Iraq, ISIS, as we have heard in the presentation by Ambassador Edmund, remains a strong organization, as shown by the attack on one of the two prisons in al-Hasakeh in January. Plus, we don't know what will happen in the coming years. A Turkish intervention might be upcoming. The Syrian regime hasn't given up its ambitions to control the whole of the country. Kurdish-Arab conflict is also a matter complicating the situation. So Syria and Iraq will remain a focal point. Still, perhaps more importantly, the situation in Idlib remains a problem, and one that is often ignored by our politicians. There is an increasing number, firstly, there is an increasing number of IS fighters and their families. Some of them are in jail, others are still out there. Some of them are even operating, trying to finance operations by the organization. Plus, we've got the former al-Nusra Front, commonly now called HTS, or Liberation Authority of Syria, which presents itself for the time being as an equivalent to the Taliban, and which builds an Islamic emirate under Turkish protection. That might be a problem in itself. Just look at the situation in Gaza if you want to have some kind of idea what an Idlib under constant HTS control might mean in the future. Plus, however, we've got al-Qaeda Syria, Horras ad-Din personnel in HTS jails in huge numbers, probably several hundred, and Syrian jails in general are not safe. They might be to some extent in eastern Syria because the Americans are still out there, but they might not be in the coming years. As a consequence, we do have a huge recruitment potential in Syria, and I think the Europeans and the Germans are totally unprepared for a breakdown of the situation in Idlib, if it matters. My third point now is Germany. What does this all mean for Germany? First, the ISIS-K connection. There has been some information about contacts between ISIS Khorasan and German recruits, some of them Russian-speaking, in the past. When we last met, I talked about the cell of Tajik citizens who were recruited by ISIS Syria and ISIS Khorasan at the same time in order to perpetrate attacks in Germany in 2019. That kind of directed attacks remains a threat, although directed attacks have not happened in Germany or in neighboring countries for, I think, about 2 years now. But what we see in connection with ISIS-K is a new scene that has not been well researched in Germany in recent years. It mainly consists of Central Asians, many of them Tajik citizens, and ethnic Albanians, either from Germany or from Austria or from Albania, Kosovo, and North Macedonia, who establish networks between Germany, Austria, and what you might call Greater Albania, namely all those states where Albanians live in southeastern Europe. These networks seem to be the ones who are most closely connected to ISIS-K, in itself proof of the hypothesis that there is a growing internationalization of jihadist terrorism. Secondly, the Syria connection remains extremely important for Germany. Our government is still struggling, like many other European governments, with former ISIS members now jailed by the Syrian PKK. We are talking in the German case about 28 men and several dozen women. The new government now has started to repatriate women, but not men, although it was agreed position of the Green Party to repatriate all of these former ISIS members. It is clearly hesitating to repatriate the men. Perhaps more importantly, we do have a big jihadist scene in Idlib. The jihadists themselves talk about 40 fighters who have joined either HTS or smaller organizations like Malhama Tactical and some others. Our security authorities, however, speak about more than 200 persons with connections to Germany who have joined either HTS or Hurras ad-Din and other organizations in recent years. If you keep in mind that a few dozen Germans in 2010 posed a threat when they were based with al-Qaeda or the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan in Pakistan, then these new numbers are clearly worrying. Here in Germany, hardly anyone talks about that. For the time being, though, we haven't seen attacks in recent years. I think the last bigger attack in our vicinity was the one in Vienna on November 2, 2020. Nevertheless, there have been several small attacks by individuals where it sometimes remains unclear to what extent ideology plays a role. In the most recent attack on a fast-speed train between Vienna and Nuremberg, the attacker now, well, there is evidence that the attacker had access to jihadist ideology. I think these attacks are not the biggest problem, especially if you compare them to the other terrorist threats in the country. But if you take seriously what Ambassador Edmund Fitton-Brown said, what I now said about Afghanistan and Syria, the problems loom behind the horizon. And as soon as one of these organizations is strong enough to rebuild external operations capacities, it will do so, and there will be a more globalized, a more internationalist, a more diverse jihadist scene that will be prone to recruitment here in Germany. Thank you.